All right, so we've given some time for some of the latecomers to come in, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So everyone, again, welcome to our webinar, Digital Transformations in Higher Education, Revolutionizing the Student Journey. My name is Summer Becker, and I'm training lead here at ProcessMaker, and I'm here with Peter Brown, who is the VP of Sales at ProcessMaker. So before we get started with Peter's presentation, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the topic a little bit to you. And then Peter is going to go on to his presentation as well as a demo of a process in ProcessMaker to show you how higher ed and digital transformation can work together through BPM software. And then at the end of the webinar today, we're going to go through a quick Q&A session. So you guys if you have any questions, feel free to submit them at any time through the questions panel in the GoToWebinar toolbar. And then we'll get around to answering those questions at the very end of the webinar today. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our webinar. So what does the current student journey look like? So for those of you who are in higher ed or who have been attending a higher ed institution in the last few years, we know that technology is totally changing the current landscape of higher ed institutions. Some of the trends right now are students being able to apply for colleges over the internet. That one has been around for a while, but also being able to fill out internal forms like change of majors or major applications through technology, through their apps, through their monitors, as well as that internal classroom structure changing where they're doing their homework and submitting it online or attending lectures over the internet. So then how does this change the business model of higher ed institutions, and how can they keep up with all of this current technology? Now, the other thing about universities is not only are they businesses, but they also have a mission to provide the best possible education for students. So how does evolving tech tie into this mission to provide great academics as well as helping universities maintain themselves as a competitive business? Now, all of these factors also tie together into the student journey. This is how students experience the higher ed experience themselves. So how does technology make it more convenient for our students? How does it attract them to higher ed universities by the technology changes within the classroom as well as the business model of their higher ed institution? So this is some of the topics that Peter is going to touch on in his presentation, which will begin right now. So give us a minute to change over the controls.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for your time today. Looking forward to going through the webinar with everyone. Here's just a quick idea of what the key things we're going to talk about today. So want to talk a little bit about the shifting landscape. I talked to lots of universities across the country, community colleges, private, public, et cetera, and just kind of some of the things that I'm hearing from different universities. Number two is kind of talking about, you know, you all get this, you're a mission-oriented organization, and really what does that mean for the student journey? And then ultimately talking about the student journey, especially from a technology perspective. And then lastly, a little case study that we have put together based off of some of our customer base. So in terms of starting, we're going to talk about the shifting landscape. But really, we want this to be interactive as much as possible. So what we're going to do is do a quick poll here to kick off. I'd love to hear from you guys. So Summer's going to use the polling feature here in GoToWebinar, and I'm going to pass it over to her.
Yep, so I have just launched the poll. You guys should be able to see a little modal window on your computer screen to be able to participate in this poll. So basically what we want to learn from you is, what are the biggest concerns your school has had about the future of higher education? So go ahead and select all that apply, and we'll give you guys a few minutes to be able to, well, not a few minutes, but a few seconds to turn in your responses. And we're still seeing responses, so I'm going to give a few more seconds. Okay, so it looks like you guys have all finished submitting your response. So Peter, it looks like you guys, it looks like most people have chosen rising administrative costs as the biggest concern that their school has had about the future of higher education.
Yeah, that's interesting. Definitely something that I've heard from other folks. I see about 60% have said rising administrative costs. Second, I see is about 50% or so rapid acceleration of technology, 40% declining enrollment and retention, and 29% government funding. So, interesting. These are just obviously some that we threw together based off of what we talked about with some of our customers and people that we meet with. And, the rising administrative cost is something that I definitely hear across the board. And it's a real challenge when I talk with schools because as you have rising administrative costs, then of course you have to offset that somehow, whether it's tuition or more donations, or of course government funding or things like that, in order to be competitive. Or there's this cost benefit analysis where you may price yourself out of being competitive based off of tuition costs and other things. So that's definitely something that I resonate with from some of the other folks that I've spoken with. The other thing that I'm interested with is that only 40% said declining enrollment / retention. It's something that I definitely have heard, again and again as I meet with universities around the country. But I think that there's this divide, and maybe that's what we're seeing here, where some universities are not really struggling with that, whether you serve a particular niche where you have, maybe an excellent department in a particular academic field, or maybe you have, something that makes you unique that lets you stand out among the crowd. But then there's definitely still a 40%, which is another large portion that may still have that kind of struggle to differentiate themselves in the market where there's a large supply of universities for students to choose from, and especially with the rise of access to information. Students can, prospective students rather, can easily Google things on their phones, and the rise of the internet, but also even mobile, the access to information is pretty overwhelming. So with that said, one of the things then kind of aligns with what I prepared. One of the things that we've all, I'm sure, read about it as we're in the higher education space, something that may not have affected us particularly, but certainly the space as a whole, is the increasing number of closures. I remember, just kind of a small personal story. My cousin, first cousin, went to a prestigious women's school in the Northeast, and they shut maybe, I think it was 2 years ago now, so maybe 3 years ago. And I remember thinking how crazy that was, because very prestigious school, lots of academic success and excellence, but also a strong alumni base. And they were just struggling to keep the doors open. And certainly we've seen that in the news with all kinds of different universities, whether they're closing or there's a merger or things like that. And that by itself might be a little bit, unnerving, but that would never happen to us, right? Like, that's kind of often our, the natural human response. But the other aspect is certainly many schools are struggling with it, meeting enrollment numbers or retention numbers or both. And that's, it sounds like 40% or so of you guys are feeling that same thing. So now we have, challenges with the, even really just staying mission oriented as an organization with, potentially pressures, competitive or otherwise, that are, allowing us to potentially struggle to stay operating. And then two, now what's the next generation going to do? certainly there's been this shift, I think, from millennials to Gen Z, where a lot of the millennials saw the path to success and the American dream was higher education. And the common story, as I meet with so many millennials, some who work for me or some who I just kind of meet on a day-to-day basis, where they took out huge amounts of student debt. They maybe even got a postgraduate degree or a second postgraduate degree, and they still are working as a barista, or they're working as in the kitchen, right, in a restaurant. And this is, certainly it's the maybe the caricature, but it's something that, again, I'll tell a personal story near and dear to I think a lot of our hearts. My sister-in-law has a degree from a very prestigious school, undergraduate degree, and she has 2 postgraduate degrees, 2 master's level degrees, and nearly $100,000 in student debt, and with no clear career path to pay that off. So in her particular case, she has, her field of career choice isn't going to pay the student debt back for quite some time. And certainly that's a huge stress for her as she's left her higher education experience. So I think what we've seen is Gen Z has started to take some of those stories from their older siblings or even their parents and their older peers, and we certainly see that impact with many universities around the country, where people are either A, choosing to maybe go part-time, or B, not even enrolling to begin with and going to a trade or a variety of other things that really is causing challenges there. The third thing, which I think I hear again, and certainly you guys all said, about 50% of you said this is something that is a challenge, it's the rapid acceleration of technology. The students who are in school today, the Gen Z generation, aren't even where many millennials, they were at the cusp of kind of this technology explosion. The millennials certainly all remember nothing but the internet, but social media and so many other phenomenon have exploded kind of during their lifetime. Whereas for the Gen Z students who are kind of just now entering university as we speak, they don't know anything besides the world with a smartphone, where everything is accessible at any time, 24/7, 365. And I've talked to so many Gen Z folks who have even learned again from their millennial older peers. To give an example, Facebook, right? So many millennials I know have posted something stupid on Facebook that got them in trouble, whether it was getting into school, or whether it was a job, or a variety of other things. Whether it was a silly picture or what a silly post or whatnot. What I've seen with a lot of the younger generation is they're much more savvy and realize what they post is going to be seen by everybody. That's why we saw the rise, of course, of Snap and Snapchat, where people want messages to expire and a variety of other things, because they're much more savvy about the world that we live in today. So all these changing expectations from the students, and you throw those together, these macro trends that are happening, I think what I see when I sit with a lot of universities and meet with them is there's this perfect storm brewing, where there's challenges on the cost side and keeping the doors open. There's challenges with the next generation with enrollment as well as retention. And then you throw in the changing expectations of the new generations. There really is this kind of challenge that we in higher education have to address and really be prepared to take our organizations to the next level. So that was kind of the first point we wanted to talk through. The next point is really about us as mission-oriented organizations and what makes us different than, say, a traditional business, corporate America, but where do we have some overlap? so again, I want to learn from you guys as much as talk at you. So we're going to do another poll question here to kick it off. But at this point, I'll turn it over to Summer again for the poll.
Yep, so once again, you guys should see a poll on your screen. This question reads, at your institution, which departments have seen the largest budget cuts? So please select one and vote right now. And we'll give you guys a few seconds to submit your answers. But again, at your institution, which departments have seen the largest budget cuts? Facilities management, information technology, staff salaries and benefits, operations, or we have not had budget cuts, which no one has submitted yet. Oh, okay, we got one person. So I'll just give you guys a few more seconds here. Okay, I will close it in 10 seconds. So if you haven't already, please submit your responses. Okay, and closing. So let's look at these results. So it looks like most of you guys have selected operations, but it seems like a pretty close match between the first four options.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think that that again, what sticks out to me here, I guess, is not that dissimilar to what I hear. The ones that got the highest numbers from you guys was operations, and then followed directly by IT, and then of course we did not have budget cuts, was by far the lowest. So I want to talk through those three because I think those are the ones that sounds like are the most telling. Most of you guys have had budget cuts, is what I'm hearing, and that's something that I hear from a lot of other universities I speak with as well. So I think that's the first kind of obvious point to make. The second to the operations and IT, operations make sense. That's where sometimes it's harder to justify the costs, maybe the administrative functions, and it's not quite as tangible and clear as a bit of an internal business case. As say, hey, our dorms are falling apart and we need to do renovation, or our student body has grown, so we need to build a new facility, or whatever that may be, right? But on the IT side, I think it's actually interesting. It's something that I hear a lot, where IT budgets have been cut, but ironically, that's part of the challenge, is that we're seeing this change in expectations. We're seeing the acceleration of technology and not being able to keep up with it. But at the same time, our universities are often kind of cutting the budget we need the most, which is IT on that arena. So that's something that I hear consistently with folks, well, of course, especially the IT departments. And it's something that we often talk about when we're meeting with prospective customers in the higher ed space, is helping get that stakeholder buy-in across the institution. So, some of the strategies I've seen, whether it's, of course, ideally something like a purchase of ProcessMaker, but even if it's some other IT, services or products you guys are looking to do, what I've seen be very successful is making sure you engage the different stakeholders. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, there's a solution you're looking to purchase, and maybe you as the registrar only have X amount of dollars budgeted. Maybe go across the aisle to the facilities program, or to the athletics director, or to some of the other department heads that might have some excess budget. And if they can get some value out of the technology as well, the sum of the parts will, of course, be greater, and certainly get better buy-in across the institution. Because as we know, we in higher ed like to make somewhat democratic decisions, right? So it's definitely helpful not only to get maybe some budget dollars, but also to get buy-in across the organization, where we can get kind of other departments involved. So with that said, I want to talk a little bit about the mission-oriented nature of universities, and really what makes you guys unique kind of in the space. If you think about it, a typical university, looks something like this in terms of structure. Everyone's slightly different, but how you organize and your departments. But you have your academics and maybe student affairs, and then you have enrollment management, admissions, things like that, business administration and finance, facilities, and then of course alumni and development. And again, depending on the university, sometimes this may be athletics is an entire separate kind of pillar, or you guys may break it out differently than each other. But generally speaking, kind of these tenets are pretty typical. And what I often see, of course, is that it's so easy to do in any organization that we forget what our mission ultimately is, and that's the students, right? So when I talk to a lot of universities, they have these pillars end up taking a lot more of the picture than the students and the academics and the things that directly relate to students. Especially if you look in terms of budget. So many of the schools I work with, the budgets of the different kind of administrative support departments actually far outweigh that of say the academics. And this is some statistics actually related to that from collegeboard.org that I think are very interesting and whatnot. And so just going to run through and comment on a couple of these statistics. So one is the staff to faculty ratio. So administration versus the learning side of the university. This is a national average, so your school may be different. But what I see, this is commonly the case. It's about 60% staff to 40% faculty. So the staff on staff, nice little pun there. No, the administration side of the university is substantially larger than the learning side. And certainly as a mission-oriented organization, we want to make sure that we can commit as many resources as we possibly can to our core mission, right? Which is educating the next generation, sending out the next generation's leaders into the workforce, getting them, ultimately, what's amazing about the higher education space is how much we impact the United States as a whole in the direction we go, right? If you think about, again, I'll tell a little bit about a personal story here. I had a dual major in college. I was a computer science major and a philosophy major. They sound maybe ironically different, but I had a lot of correlation and overlap there, intellectually at least. And in some of my philosophy classes, I distinctly remember a course about the history of philosophy kind of throughout the world, and how the philosophy studied in higher education, whether that was Athens and ancient Greece, or whether it was, is Cambridge and Oxford in England, or whether it's, name your university in the United States, that the avant-garde happens with us. As we start shifting how we view the world philosophically and teach that to the next generation of students and explore that, that is ultimately what shifts the culture. And whether that's, from a philosophical perspective, pre-modernism, postmodernism, et cetera, the shift in kind of how the world views the world often starts with us. And so we want to make sure that we're putting the resources to that, because it is so mission oriented, unlike almost any other type of organization, that it's a really awesome calling. Number two, then, kind of statistic is the staff composition. What's interesting here when you break it up is seeing some of these areas. There's certainly some support things that we would say, yeah, absolutely impact the student experience and journey. Things like student affairs, of course, but also things like IT, as we've discussed already, or business and finance. You kind of have to have that function in order to operate. But what's interesting is that national averages, again, the largest bucket is actually office and then admin. And again, this is a third-party source. This is collegeboard.org. But But what I find interesting here is that we put a lot of emphasis on the administrative side of things, where we're not truly benefiting the student, their educational experience, and our mission as an institution. The other bucket is another one that kind of sticks out to me. That's also a pretty large bucket, and 15%. So again, some interesting things as we start breaking those numbers down. The next one is then the ratios. So this is student ratios, student to faculty and student to staff. And I broke it out even more particularly with public versus private nonprofit. And what you'll see is, no surprise, there is a larger student to faculty and staff ratio at public universities as opposed to private nonprofit. It's something that certainly private universities have touted for quite some time, a much closer or smaller ratio where you get much more hands-on experience and whatnot. But what's interesting here is you see the faculty is on both cases higher than the staff ratio. So meaning there are more staff to students than there are faculty to students. Again, kind of indicative of where we put our money in terms of infrastructure and whatnot. And also, what's interesting though is the gap, I think, between the public and the private nonprofit. We'll see the private nonprofits just under 10, they're like 9 point something, and the public is around 14. Not actually that far off. I actually expected, before I looked at the statistics, to see a much bigger gap. But interestingly, they're not that far apart. The other thing that I did was started looking at the trends, and this is a 30-year trend. So it's interesting. I picked these numbers because I didn't want to basically just look at a small sampling. I wanted to see, is the trend changing over time, right? And a substantial amount of time. So if we look at 1995, 2005, and 2015, we see the trend actually stays pretty similar. The ratio of students to faculty has gone down a bit as a whole, and this is all higher ed in the United States. But the staff ratio has gone up a little bit, but they're marginal changes. So that's something that definitely I think we as institutions should be thinking about and considering. Not how do we get rid of staff, and how do we get rid of jobs. In fact, often with technology, the goal is not to do that. It's not job elimination. It's how to deploy resources, human staffing resources, more effectively. So maybe instead of doing something that's a back office paperwork, if we automate that paperwork, we can have that role be more focused around engaging students more effectively, or some other capacity, right? So that's, I think, what I'm hearing a lot of universities say as they start to try to think about the future. Where can we reallocate resources, not eliminate, but let's leverage technology to reallocate resources to really improve that student experience. So now we'll kind of move to the third point, but at this point, again, I want to hear from you guys and see what your thoughts are on this. So I'll turn it back to Summer for the final poll here.
Yep, so now you guys should be able to see the poll on your screen. What we want to know from you is, where do you students have the biggest challenges in their journey? Is it admissions, financial aid, determining the right major, employment opportunities, or career counseling? And please, I'll give you guys a few seconds, maybe a minute, to submit your answers. But again, where do your students have the biggest challenges in their journey? Admissions, financial aid, determining the right major, employment opportunities, or career counseling. And we've still got people submitting, so I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a few more seconds. So again, please submit your answers. Right now it looks like employment opportunities is winning. All right, I'll give you guys about 10 more seconds. All right, now I'm going to close the poll and let's see what we've got here. So it looks like you guys have chosen employment opportunities with admissions as a runner-up. So Peter, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think back. Unfortunately, my experience with admissions is a few decades ago, so it's harder for me to resonate with that one. The world has shifted a lot since I applied for school, but the employment opportunities one is quite interesting. I think it actually relates quite nicely to one of the other ones, which is financial aid, right? So many students I talk to, and it looks like you guys feel the same way. Financial aid is a challenge, not so much maybe, of course, scholarships. Yes, of course that, but also loans, right? So that is a form of financial aid. It's just, a much more burdensome one. And I think maybe what we're seeing is students are getting more creative and they want to get on-campus jobs, or many times they're even getting employment off campus, of course, in order to make sure that they're not going into that kind of debt. So, what's interesting about that is, again, my own personal university experience was a while ago, so it may not be this way today, but I remember certainly employment opportunities on campus were posted and whatnot, and fairly easily accessible, but highly competitive. There's whatever amount of students and only so many jobs, and so many of us who needed to work had to kind of go off campus. And one of the things that I've seen some universities do is actually provide a channel for students to easily engage with local businesses. So basically the universities have built relationships with some of the local businesses, especially the ones that require more seasonality. So whether that's restaurants or other types of more seasonal businesses, and built some relationships to help give a channel for students to be able to easily get hiring. And so that's one thing that I've seen. The other one that was high on the list was the admission side. And again, my personal experience isn't incredibly relevant. I had to mail in my application. In fact, I had to get my application via mail, and then I had to send it back via mail with postage and whatnot. I think most of the current generation, Gen Z, may not even remember what a post stamp is. So that said, making that process simple is not just about putting an online portal there. I'll give you an example of some customers that we've worked with where we've helped this. Think about the volume of applications that you get, and a human has to put eyes on those. And maybe there's a different way though. So what I've seen some folks consider doing is actually build some automation rules into their application process where it automatically routes things based off priority. So imagine that student who has a great SAT score, good GPA, they have been involved in extracurriculars, all the typical things that we are looking for when we're doing admissions. And building some of those automation rules where it doesn't reject or accept the student, but it escalates internally. So maybe we spend less time on students that aren't, well, rather, maybe we don't spend any time on those that don't meet our criteria as a bare minimum threshold, kind of like a red light. And then we have a yellow light where we have kind of the folks who fit in the middle, and then a green light where maybe that goes directly to the director of admissions who wants to personally reach out to the student or prospective student, right? So that's something that I've seen some innovative schools start to think about. It's not even about technology. It's really about leveraging technology for business practice, right? And that, I think, relates to our final point here in terms of the webinar, which is the student journey or student experience. This is kind of a diagram that I put together, talking with lots of universities and thinking about kind of what that journey looks like from the student's perspective. you'll see, of course, as with many students, it's winding, and it's not always a cycle. Of course, it does cycle in terms of semester and year and whatnot, but every student's unique, and their path in university may be unique, and whether they take 5 years or whether they do part-time or whether they get a bachelor's or they stay on for their MBA or a variety of other considerations. But what also I think is the case is that there are so many different touch points where students are doing things manually. So whether that's research, studies have shown this. Students have done research over the internet long before they've ever reached out to you guys. So how do we get you in front of the students from a marketing perspective, so that they even know kind of who we are and what we're all about? But then there's the selection process, and we were just talking about that in terms of admissions. But so one of the areas that I hear a lot of students complain about is transfers, where it's such a challenging process. And when it doesn't follow kind of the standard admissions process, it's actually quite cumbersome. The next area, financial aid. That, again, as we've discussed, is a major burden, especially if, long-term burden for the student. A lot of these students go into their higher education experience not really thinking about the long-term impact taking on that kind of debt, and being able to be coached by the university into what the best financial products are. Maybe even working and partnering with some banks to offer better financial programs, but certainly the educational side. And that goes all the way through from simple requests like having access to Wi-Fi or parking passes. So many of these things that we take for granted as faculty and staff, the student has to do manually with pieces of paper. And worse, they have to walk around campus to do it all. So an example from one of our board members here at ProcessMaker, he's an adjunct professor at a pretty prestigious school in Florida. And there's a change of major request that a student has to fill out if they miss a test and have to do a makeup, and it's not change of major, sorry, change of grade request. And what the process looks like at this university, again, prestigious university, they have the form handwritten on carbon copy paper. So I had to think about it because it had been so long since I'd used it myself, but I'm sure you guys all remember it, the pink and yellow slips, right? Like, it wasn't even just a paper form, it was literally carbon copy type old forms. And this adjunct professor actually, as you'd expect, doesn't live near the university. He's a part-time professor. So in order for him to fill it out, the student had to give it to him. He had to fill it out and bring it back. But the only options for him were to either mail it in, drive it in. And so he lives in Miami, but traffic there means that getting to the university was about an hour both ways. So for him, driving in wasn't really, didn't make make too much sense. So he mailed it in, and about 2 weeks later, he got a call from his student yelling at him because he hadn't changed the grade. And so he had to, the professor that is, had to track down in the administration what happened. Ultimately, what had happened is the staff had actually lost the grade change request. So he said, well, how do I rectify that? Oh, well, you have to fill out the form again. Well, I did that and it got lost. Oh, well, maybe you should just bring it in this time. So not only was it a painful experience for the student, but also it was impacting the faculty. So, just by the idea of this paper process, it creates this experience that impacts us in so many intangible ways. Maybe it doesn't directly lead to students leaving. Maybe it doesn't directly lead to alumni not donating back to the school again. Maybe it doesn't directly mean the faculty members leave. But there's certainly you know, the world has changed, and often we in higher ed, you know, are kind of behind the curve there from the administrative perspective. In reality, it doesn't look even like that. It looks a lot like this. And this often is, you know, when I talk to universities, there's paper everywhere, paper in the admissions process, paper in financial aid, paper transcript requests, paper facilities management requests, wet signatures, internal memos, people having to walk around campus. And just like I mentioned on that story, all this back and forth creates bottlenecks and makes it error prone. Things don't happen. Even if they happen only because of effort from the student. And this really creates a frustrating experience for the student. Their goal and role is not really to track down paperwork, but rather to learn and to facilitate that process. So that's, I guess, brings me to the case study I wanted to mention, and then give a quick idea of how we're helping universities today. But this is a tale of two different universities, similar profile in a lot of ways, and some major differences. So one is Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, and the other is Becker College in Worcester, Massachusetts. They're both very historic universities. You'll see both founded quite a number of years ago, 1869 and 1784. In fact, Becker College is one of the first universities that was established in the United States, and Trinity was one of the first universities established when Texas became part of the United States. They both are small liberal arts schools, about 2,000 students or so, and about the same number of faculty and staff. What you'll notice, though, is their endowment is pretty massively different. So Trinity has about a little over $1 billion endowment, and in 2010, Becker College's endowment had gotten down to just over $1 million. They fortunately have kind of righted the ship, and they're now at $5 million, but it's even still not even on the same playing field from an endowment perspective. And what's interesting is you'd expect a university like Trinity, therefore, to have a lot more automation. What's interesting about this story is Becker came to us because they needed to figure something out. They were having declining enrollment, declining retention, poor graduation rates. They were literally on the verge of kind of shutting the doors. And you can look at some news articles, I'm sure, back from 2010 and 11, and they were actually in the news for that. They had a new president come in, kind of wanted to shift how they went about things, and they did a lot of changing on how they did and approached things. One, to give you an example, was they realized they had a really good niche in terms of computer game design. So they had a very good program around with a specialty in computer game design, and they were attracting good students around that. So they started marketing that, and they started focusing on that, and that helped bring kind of them uniquely positioned within kind of the larger landscape. One of the other initiatives, of course, was bringing in some technology. So to give you an idea, this is, I spoke with some folks from Trinity here a couple months ago, and they were telling me about a particular process that they had that was paper driven, and we were talking through it and whatnot, and they said something about this form being used with a typewriter, and I kind of paused for a minute and said, what do you mean a typewriter? Like, you mean like a word processor, right? Like, like a computer, you typed it up? No, a typewriter. I'm like, oh, I have used a typewriter. I learned to type on a typewriter. It's been a number of decades since I have seen one. And you guys use this, what's it for? Oh, there's a form that has to be filled out, and the form fits in the typewriter. So many of the staff will actually fill it out with a typewriter, and we still have some of those around on campus. I'm like, oh, it really so took me back that they were still using a typewriter. But I think this is just indicative and a principle of, you know, a school with a huge endowment for their size has the opportunity to spend on technology, but is really providing a painful experience both for internal staff and faculty, but also students. Vice versa, Becker has kind of reapproached how they did everything. And this is just some quick quotes from them, but they were using, you know, as with many universities I talked to, PDFs, Word documents, paper, slow, painful. It was a broken system. And now, you know, flash forward, they've actually gone fully paperless. They're not faxing things. They're not taking pictures. They're not walking around campus, et cetera. So that hopefully gives you guys some ideas of where, you know, whether it's technology or whether it's just business practices rather. You know, not everything is solved by technology. In fact, technology simply enables things to be faster, cheaper, whatever. Without the right business approach as well, in combination with the technology, you may not find the results that you're looking for. So with that said, we're just going to give you kind of a sneak preview, quick idea here of how we're helping some universities automate things. Really want to make this primarily focused around the content, but we'll look a little bit here at a demo of the platform and then open it up for questions and answers. So you'll notice I'm going to log into our platform here as if I'm a student. So I'm going to log in. You'll notice it is a web-based platform. What do I mean by that? I mean that accessible anywhere. Not only that, it's built for mobile. So we built it with the idea that you want to be able to always easily and seamlessly use on a mobile device anywhere, whether that's an iPad, Android tablet, or an iPhone, or some sort of smartphone. But we also have native iOS and Android apps in the App Store. But I'm logged in, say, as a student, and you'll see on the left-hand side, for example, opens a navigation menu here with, you know, various different aspects or subcategories that a student may need to do. Little notification bell up here. They can start a new request. They can do work that they have to do quite simply. But let's say, for example, this, to give you an idea, this student needs to change a major. Instead of having to fill out a form, they can easily fill that out digitally. They can know who's participating, who's the bottleneck, where it is, who's doing what. There's good insight and transparency. So not only can they fill out a form digitally, but better than that, the system can look up their data from the student information system. So they don't even have to fill out the same information that they, you know, already get integrated from the student information system. They may only have to choose, you know, something like what their new requested major is. And, you know, maybe something as simple as like, would you like to be notified via email or SMS? And so in this particular case, the student is going to submit this request. And what you're, you know, that's just a quick idea of how easy it is for the student to do what they have to do. And now I'm logged in as if I'm the faculty member. And you'll see the faculty has a whole different kind of navigation that may be related to their particular role and in what department they are and whatnot. This is all configurable without having to write any code, so you can really tweak it to your particular university. But the particular advisor, in this case John Keating, got a request from his student. And so digitally, again, John doesn't have to fill out any paperwork, but also the form can be pre-filled with any of the information that needs to be provided. You'll see, for example, Jose, the student's information is here. The advisor can sign it digitally, so no reason to require a wet signature if it's something that we can perform digitally. And then, of course, it now advances, say, to the new advisor. Now, I'm not logging out of the different account just to give you an idea, but the new advisor now may receive that same form. So you see here on this form that's loaded on your screen, you'll see that the previous signatures there, the new advisor may approve that, and that gets forwarded on to the dean or to whomever else needs to be to doing this this particular request. And of course, then it'll notify the student in real time, again, via email or SMS or whatever kind of channel that you'd like to provide that in. So that gives you a quick, 5-minute overview. Obviously, there's a lot more that we can show. If you guys are interested, we'd love to engage with you. But really wanted to give you some ideas of what we're hearing in the market, where the landscape is shifting, what some other universities are doing in terms of kind of engaging students, again, through business practices, but also technology or a combination of both. So with that said, what we're going to do is wrap up the presentation portion of the webinar, and we'll open it up for Q&A.
All right, thank you, Peter. Let me go ahead and show my screen. Again, you feel free to submit your questions in the questions panel and GoToWebinar, and then we will answer them right now.
All right, good deal. See a few questions coming in. So the first one I'm seeing is a simple housekeeping one. We'll tackle that because that's straightforward. We are recording the webinar, and we'll make sure that it is available to you guys after the completion of the webinar. So getting kind of more to the types of questions that you guys are looking to ask about the content. One is, what are the most common processes schools are automating? I think that's a great question. So one of the things I hear most is that student experience is something that schools are really looking to take on. So student-related processes are the most common, kind of from a principal or kind of guideline perspective, but often ones that are involving more than one department and or person who needs to be involved. So maybe a student, a faculty member, and a staff member, or maybe a student and multiple staff members, or a student and a staff, right? So those are just the kind of principles I see. But to throw out a couple, just to give you an idea, we see a lot of universities doing, the application process and kind of the whole admissions and selection process. Academic ones that I see a lot are change a major, add drop, declare a major. There's also some that I see around more kind of the facilities management. So where it's things that like parking passes and laundry access and all the different things that they have to do. Again, often paper-based. So that's hopefully starts the wheels churning. But ultimately, of course, ProcessMaker can be deployed in any type of automation you're looking to do with a low-code kind of perspective. So looking at some more questions. One question is about the community edition versus the enterprise. So one of the things about ProcessMaker is that we do provide open source edition. That's something that we are very happy about, and I think aligns well with higher education. We have for 10 years or more actually offered this for people like students, especially like computer science type students, or maybe information systems students, folks like that. And we really see this as a great opportunity to give back to the community. But of course, for the university themselves, certainly it is open source, but the enterprise edition is really where you're going to get kind of the value that you'd be needing if you're looking to automate things across the campus and whatnot. So great question there. Couple others as we have a few more minutes here. So looks like one person said, hey, we purchased some workflow tools in the past, but did not really have good success implementing it. What kind of thoughts do you have there? That's a great question, and something we hear a lot. So a lot of the student information system providers have some form of workflow tooling, whether that's, think like PeopleSoft or Ellucian or other kind of core systems for higher education. So how are we different, and why is that going to kind of have different results? ProcessMaker is really built with this notion of low to no code. So pretty much anything within the platform can be done with no code, whether that's building out the process, building out screens, changing the interface, changing the options that, the permissions and all those types of things. So to build a process, it's drag and drop. To build a screen, drag and drop. So what we see a lot of universities starting to do is helping kind of reduce some of the bottlenecks that IT often has and get the business side of the house involved. So maybe the registrar can build the forms, and maybe they can build the processes, and IT only needs to handle any additional extensions of the platform, maybe some API calls to integrate to other systems like PeopleSoft or other kind of systems out there you might be integrating with. But the business side of the house can very easily build solutions without having to kind of eat up bandwidth from IT. So good question there.
All right, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you everyone for your questions. Peter, thank you so much. If you guys have any remaining questions, you guys can feel free to email us at info@processmaker.com or visit our website, processmaker.com, or call us at 1-919-289-1377. Again, thank you, Peter, so much for being here today. And we hope to
Absolutely.
see you all next time. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.